Alright folks, how you doing? For some reason my camera's not turning on. I think it's because I dropped it a few weeks ago, being, the dumbass that I am. Just drop the fucking thing and now it doesn't work. But or sometimes it does work, it just doesn't work right now for whatever reason. Need to get a new webcam. But anyway, today is the 30th anniversary of the premiere of Braveheart. And let me tell you, for being Mel Gibson's directorial debut, phenomenal. 10 out of 10. It was a great movie. I mean, this was the first time Mel Gibson had even directed a film. And he didn't even want to star in it. He was like, I'm too old. Because Wallace was like in his 20s for most of it. He died in his mid 30s, you know, and I think he was like 40 at the time, in his 40s, So he's like, no, we need a younger actor to portray William Wallace. But the studio was like, no, we only make it unless you're the star of the show. But he's like, I'm too old. But I'm like, well, no, but you've got the star power. And he said himself in the DVD commentary, because I watched it right the way through, more than once with the commentary on, he was gone off his head, like all the stress, all the pressure on him. He's having to act, one or two takes at the most, and like that's it, just behind the camera. Same as Clint Eastwood, by the way. He's also a bit like that. He only does as many takes as he has to do, like one or two. If it goes more than two takes, he's rolling his eyes like, fuck's sake. I think Mel Gibson was a bit like that. I know he doesn't overdo it. He's kind of the polar opposite to Peter Jackson, who made the Lord of the Rings movies, notorious for going 30, 40, 50 takes, to the point that I remember Christopher Lee was saying to Ian McKellen, we're fucking got this, right? Why the fuck are we doing this like 50 times? And Ian McKellen's just like, I don't know. But, I think a necessity in the case of Mel Gibson. He's just like, I'm directing this, I'm starting it, I'm working most days. Let's just do one or two takes. First take, second take for coverage, third for insurance, right, move on. And I've heard actors who worked on the movie, like Tommy Flanagan and Brian Cox, say it was a terrific experience. Mel was an absolute pleasure to work with. Went out of his way in the case of Brian Cox to get him in the movie, even though he was filming Rob Roy at the time. And he said, I'll just give you any role you want. Just pick one and no bother. I just want you in the movie. Just pick whatever you want. So he picked the role of Uncle Argyle, which was a brief role because he was filming another movie at the time. He couldn't really commit to it. So he said, I'll take this very brief role where, I make an impact at the beginning, but I'm like in and out. I think Mel Gibson is a phenomenal director. He really is, producer as well, I'm sure. He has been on many projects. But Braveheart is a 10 out of 10 film. It's a very, very good film. In terms of historical accuracy, it's a heap of shite, to be honest. I've done the, but that's not really Mel Gibson's fault. That was, Randall Wallace's fault, because he was the writer. Mel Gibson was the director. They compartmentalized these productions. But, it's very entertaining, and it did put a lot of light on Scottish history. So it really did its job. There are a lot of problems with Braveheart, though. Like, why is Scotland portrayed as like this flea-bitten, Stone Age backwater? I mean, if Scotland was really like that, why would King Edward the First bother his arse trying to conquer the Scots? I mean, if it's just this primeval, Stone Age, why would you even bother your arse? Scotland was a very prosperous country at the time, and medieval times, we were extremely prosperous because we were trading all over the world. I heard somebody tell me once that the oldest trade partner for Scotland is Portugal, of all places, for whatever reason, and that would harken to that Iberian connection talked about, when Scotland was Jewish, the Sephardics coming in and, taking over the trades, the tobacco trade, with the colonies, mining, optics, all the rest. I went through all that when Scotland was Jewish. But, that Iberian connection, but, to do with the Sephardic Jews and all the rest, that's something I've gone into in the past. I'll go over it again when I recover it on Tribe of Judah. But, I can believe it, that the oldest trading partner for Scotland was Portugal. It makes perfect sense, actually, when you put it in context. But also we were trading with like France and Low Countries and the Baltic countries, and all of our main cities are on rivers or on the coastline. So Scotland was an extremely prosperous country. The way it's portrayed in Braveheart, it's almost like insultingly backwards. We're not this flea-bitten Stone Age, maybe Bronze Age at best, primeval backwater. But, like I say, it was his first attempt, at directing a movie, Mel Gibson, and it really is a very, very good movie. It's not a documentary though. Having said that, um, almost everything you see in the film, you reverse it, you flip it around, and the opposite tends to be closer to the truth in most cases. I've covered it before. William Wallace, Robin Hood Revealed. I've covered it extensively. But you're not really meant to take movies very seriously. They're movies. You go to the Wallace Monument. There's this statue. It didn't look anything like that. Wallace was like 6'9". He was a big, huge guy, and he was clean shaven, and he had like curly brown hair, bright blue eyes. Hands like paws. Quite a handsome, good-looking guy. But he's no like how he's portrayed in Braveheart at all. His real personality was quite different, and he was a lot younger. But like I say, Mel Gibson had to take the role, otherwise the production would not have gotten off the ground. Even though Mel Gibson was like, I don't want to play Wallace, I just want to direct it, and he damn near went off his head with all the stress and all the worry, and all the pressure that was brought to bear on him, But you can tell that, Mel was a real student of the game. He had studied under great directors, and I would say he became a great director himself. I've never seen A Patriot, by the way, or I think any other movie that he's directed. But I'm a big fan of Mel Gibson in real life. I think he's a great filmmaker, a good actor, very good actor. His performances. I never had a problem with his accent either. Like, oh, that's almost fuck off, man. There's no such thing as a Scottish accent as a homogenous thing. Different parts of Scotland sound different. I think he did fine with it. I think also that Chris Pine did fine in Outlaw King, which was a lot more historically accurate, but not even half as entertaining. So there you go. But for what it was, Braveheart is 10 out of 10. It's a very, very good movie. It's not a documentary, though. You have to be able to compartmentalize. If you want to know the truth about the real William Wallace, watch the series I did on William Wallace, Robin Hood Revealed, which I'll cover again in Tribe of Judah, because I've redone that. I've re-edited those presentations to make them shorter and more concise, to make them more digestible. But yeah, I think Braveheart was an excellent film. But as a documentary, it's piss poor. But as a movie, yeah, it does the job, and it brought a lot of light onto Scotland. Helped the tourism industry massively, brought in a lot of money. Through the tourist trade. And Wallace is a historical figure who's not nearly covered enough. Um, he was a great man. He was a legend. Wallace certainly had his flaws, that's for sure. And I've never held back from criticizing where necessary. I made a lot of I was about to say movies. I've made a lot of videos on Wallace on this channel, so feel free to check them out. I haven't made any movies about him, but I've covered the real William Wallace extensively on this channel. I don't know how many videos I've made about him, but I don't know, got to be well over a dozen. Just on him, not even counting the William Wallace Robin Hood Revealed videos. I made videos about how he was practically a saint, about how he was a great general, some of his best quotes, some of the actions. It's got to be closer to about 2 dozen videos I made on Wallace, now that I think about it. I don't know, I haven't sat down and calculated it, but I've made a lot. But anyway, thanks very much for watching, and at this point I'm just rambling here, so time to wrap it up, I think. Anyway, thanks for watching, and take care.